Hi, and welcome back to Paul's SAT Reading Comprehension Program. In this video, we're going to finish up with some discussion of inference and talking about double passage strategy. This will be the last video in the series, and hopefully you've had a good time. We'll talk about a recap in the end. So in this video, we're going to talk about what exactly inference is. We're going to talk about what we need to do to infer properly, and we're going to talk about what we need to be aware of most when we deal with double passages. Double passages are slightly different than individual passages because there's some amount of comparison going on that you don't really do in other kinds of passages, so we'll talk about how to treat them specially. And of course, as always, examples and discussion of our points of discussion. So, inference, what is it? It's easier to show inference than to describe inference. So, there's a little story here. Imagine there are three men on a train, and they're coming into Scotland. The first man is an ecologist, the second's a logician, and the third man is a mathematician. They look out the window, and they see a brown cow out the window of the train. And it's right next to the train, and they all look at it and they see it at the same time. And the ecologist says, "Ha! Look!" They've never been to Scotland before, and they're easily excited. The ecologist says, "Look, Scottish cows are brown," because they all see a brown cow. The logician says, no, there is at least one Scottish cow that is brown. This is what we can tell about cows in Scotland. We see one, there's at least one, this is all we can know. And the mathematician says, "You're both wrong, there's at least one Scottish cow that appears to be brown on one side." So the mathematician is much more specific about the amount of information that he allows influence his judgment. And you can see, so an ecologist looks at the big picture. And it's reasonable to assume from what the ecologist says that from what you see one brown cow, you might think, we're in Scotland, all the cows are brown. Logically, though, we only see one cow. It may be the only brown cow in Scotland. We don't know. We've never been to Scotland before. This is the point that we're trying to make. The mathematician is going way too far. The mathematician is making an absurd, he's cutting off an absurd amount of inference for what the information has. If you see something that's brown on one side, it's probably brown on the other side. He's going only on what he knows. So the point of this story is to show that we shouldn't add information to the story. We want to be more like the logician than the mathematician, but we still don't want to add anything into the story that's not already there. So let's practice. See if you can learn a lesson from the story we just told. What color is this house? Okay, and it may be a little fuzzy on the video, but what you see is red. But I want you to tell me, what color is this house? Okay, hopefully you picked up the lesson of the story. If you're paying attention, you should be thinking that the correct answer is that this house is red on one side, because we can only see one side of the house. A bit of a trick question. And this is how you should be thinking when you are answering the question. Again, this is an extreme point, but you don't want to add information. So practice. Let's take a look at some actual text, and I want you to see what you can infer logically from the information in this sentence. What is it possible to deduce, like Sherlock Holmes? What is it possible to surmise, to guess, to figure out from the information in this sentence? Bill walked quickly down the street. It's a very small amount of information, but take a moment and try to think what you can safely assume based on this amount of information. Go ahead and pause the video and do what we normally do. Okay, what can we surmise? What can we infer? What can we tell from this amount of information about Bill walking quickly down the street? Well, you might be tempted to say that he's late, right? People usually hurry when they're late for something. But you could also just as easily infer that he's cold, he wants to get out of the cold, he's angry, he's afraid. The only thing you can really infer is that he's going to get wherever he's going faster than he normally would, because we have the word quickly. That's how specific we need to be when we're looking at questions for the SAT. All right, try this one instead. We'll add a little bit more information. Same thing, pause the video and guess what we can surmise, or you tell me what we can surmise. Bill walked quickly down the street. He checked his watch and shook his head with frustration. He walked faster. Okay, what can we tell? Though it's not stated clearly, it's not stated explicitly, it says he walked quickly, he checked his watch, he shook his head with frustration, and he walked faster. In this case, we can infer that he's late. This isn't mathematically precise, but it's enough that we should, with confidence, be able to say, okay, he's late. He's walking quickly already, he looks at his watch, he walks faster. That's a reasonable assumption to make, that he's late. And there's enough information that if you tried to interpret it in another way, why would he look at his watch if he's cold? Why would he look at his watch if he's angry? None of these things really hold up quite as well as late. Some questions will ask you to figure out the information only from what's in the text. So you have the text, and you're supposed to extrapolate what's going on. And there's others that will have you go even further, as in like other situations. So let's use that same sentence to answer these questions. Bill walked quickly down the street. He checked his watch and shook his head with frustration. He walked faster. Can we answer this question? If a person stopped Bill on the street to ask him for directions, he would do what? Okay, now this is a question that's asking us to go outside the text. It's asking us to speculate. Previously, when we talked about what can we know because of what we see there, it's all about Bill, and it's all within the text. We're talking about the character, but now we're talking about something that's not in the text, and we have to extrapolate from the information that we have. So, which of these options fits best for our expectations for Bill? Would he yell at them? Would he avoid them? Would he politely refuse them? Would he stop and help? Or would he cry? Okay, now this is a little tricky. Which of these can we support with the information that we have? There is a logical way to come to an answer here. It may seem like we have conflict, but if we reason properly, only one of these fits well enough to confidently answer. So again, Bill walked quickly down the street, he checked his watch and shook his head with frustration. He walked faster. Stop the video, think for a moment, and isolate one of these that you think is the best answer. Alright, let's talk about it. Would Bill yell at them? Okay, would Bill yell at them? What do we need to see in the text to prove that Bill would yell at a person who stopped him in his quick walk? We need to see something that indicated his rage, or that he is angry at somebody or at something, or that he has a tendency to yell. If it said that Bill, always an angry man, walked quickly down the street, then we might be able to say yell. But the only thing we have is frustration, and we don't know what that frustration is aiming at. I'm being very, very specific in the amount of information we're talking about, but this is how I want you to think about these things. It should go faster than this, obviously. Yell at them. Frustration is not strong enough. He's frustrated with something we don't know about. We can't say this frustration would lead to yelling. Okay, what about avoiding? Do we have anything that says that he would avoid them? Now this, I think, sounds like the best possible answer. He's in a hurry. He's late. We don't know anything about how he would interact with people. The best we can infer is this more general avoiding rather than the more specific yelling at them. And just the same way that yelling doesn't work, politely wouldn't necessarily work. And he's in a hurry, so we can maybe even infer beyond that and say, well, he's in a hurry, he may not be polite, and he's frustrated. So frustration doesn't let us use yell, but it also doesn't let us say polite on the other end as well. Would he stop and help? Well, same thing. He's in a hurry. We know he checked his watch, he's frustrating, he's walking faster after he sees what time it is. We know he's not going to stop and help. And finally, same as everything, there's no support for crying. If he cried, that would be new information. Frustration, again, is not enough. We can't go all the way with cry. So hopefully this is an indication of within the text, using to support something, supposition outside the text. For inference questions, remember, you shouldn't be making up stories. If you find yourself thinking to yourself, okay, well, but this one isn't in the text, but if this happened, then this would be right. Then you're over-inferring. You're adding information. And there are more examples in the book talking about these kind of things. Don't over-infer, don't make up stories for what's going on in the text. Look only at the words that you're using. Remember, all the answers are provable or disprovable by information that is in the text. If you don't see a support, that means it's wrong. Okay? Now, let's move on and start talking about double passages. These are not necessarily related, but there is some connections that need to be made from one passage to another. First of all, a quick rundown about what's different about double passages than other passages. First of all, you want to find out how each passage would view the other passage. So passage 1 has a point of view about the topic. Passage 2 has a point of view about the topic. They always share a topic. And you want to see what would passage 1's author view, how would passage 1's author view passage 2's author's point of view. Second, you want to talk about what each passage has that the other one doesn't. So if passage 1 has a big long history of the topic and passage 2 has a personal anecdote, you want to note that. What do they do that's different from each other? And in the same vein, what does each passage do that's the same as other passages? Because they always ask questions about these things. Within one passage, with a one passage section, the questions are about the content of the passage. But within a double passage section, there's going to be nearly half of the questions are about how the two passages relate to one another. So these are the things you want to notice. Focus on these aspects and you're going to be ready for, it's usually about half of the questions are about the relationship between the two passages. Some things to remember, this is pretty important, don't answer, you'll notice that they actually go in order when you go into the questions. The first 3 or 4 or 5 questions in a double passage section will all be about passage 1. And then the next 3 or 4 or 5 questions will all be about passage 2. And then you'll start with the questions that are about both of them. It's tempting to address all the passage 1 questions first after you read passage 1, and then address all the passage 2 questions after you read passage 2, but it's not good. Because then all the rest of the questions are going to be about the relationship between those two passages. And if you read the two passages at different times, then you're not going to naturally form the connections that you should if you were thinking about the thing as a whole. So be careful about that. Don't fall into that temptation and read both passages at the same time. If you need to go back later and refresh your memory, do that while you're reading passage 2. You see something in passage 2, like, oh, that reminds me of passage 1. Then go back to passage 1 while you're reading it at the same time. Now, and also while you're reading both of the passages, label them when you see something. It helps you visualize how the two pieces work together. It helps you in your mind bring them into something. Always do labeling, but with double passages is especially important because if you have someone's point of view in passage 1 that contradicts someone's point of view in passage 2, draw a big old line from passage 1 to passage 2, and you'll remember immediately when that comes up. You're like, oh, I know exactly what this is asking about. That's Dr. Bill's opinion versus Dr. Susan's opinion, and they disagree with one another. The point of view, talking about Dr. Bill, Dr. Susan, some, many say, those kind of things. A lot of the questions are related to the comparison of the two passages are going to do with comparing the two point of views and tones of one another. Make sure you recognize when you see them when they conflict with one another. So, for example, you read passage 1 and Dr. Bill says, anyone who doesn't like sandwiches is a horrible person, right? And clearly, because you know what you're doing and you know to look for your points of view and your characters, you see, aha, Dr. Bill has a strong opinion about sandwiches. You mark that point of view, POV, right there on the passage. And then you get to passage 2 and you see, it mentions people who insult anti-sandwich people. And you remember, that was Dr. Bill. Dr. Bill is exactly those. So you draw a connection and you say, this guy is talking about Dr. Bill. Even though he doesn't say Dr. Bill doesn't like anti-sandwich people, you see the connection. You see that passage 2 is talking about those who insult anti-sandwich. Bill says anyone who doesn't like sandwiches is horrible. Passage 2 doesn't like Dr. Bill. That's what you need to recognize when you're reading it. Now, this, again, may seem obvious, but the more you get into it, the more you do it, the more you practice it, the more you see how the passages interconnect with one another, then the more ready you're going to be. Now, these 2 points of view are in contrast with each other, and if you see something this obvious, something as obvious as this connection right here, there is almost like 99% chance there is going to be a question about it. That's the point of noticing these things, is this is what they ask questions about when you get to the questions. It's extremely likely there's going to be a question about that disagreement. And so that's why it's important to improve your ability to recognize these contrasts. See the points of view, see the characters, see how the 2 passages interact with one another. And also notice what the relationship of the main idea of each passage is to the other one. Many double passages are set up in a pro-con contrast. Passage 1 is for the thing. Passage 2 is against it, or it'll switch and it'll start out against it and passage 2 will be for it. As it says here, one passage may list reasons why it's good to drink lots of water, and the other one would list reasons why it's bad to drink lots of water. This is really common, and the easiest ones are very obviously pro-con. And the more complicated and the more difficult the passages get, however, one passage may discuss the benefits of water, and then the other one will say, there are benefits to drinking a lot of water, but, and that will be a question. That will absolutely be a question. What's the main relationship between these 2 passages? Passage 1 supports a concept that passage 2 qualifies its support for, or something like that. Another combination will be that the passage 1 says that water is good, and passage 2 says the benefits of drinking water are overstated. Now, it's not necessarily against drinking water, but it's basically against the point of view that passage 1 had, and that's the intricacy of the relationship that you need to pin down, and that's why it's good to label. Another example, passage 1 talks about the benefits of water, while passage 2 talks about the benefits of tea. Maybe a slight mention of water. There's always going to be some connection to that central message. But even in that point, you're contrasting water and tea and the benefits of 2 different kinds of drinking water. That's the kind of thing that they will ask questions about. I guarantee it. So, double passages are one of the things in the reading section that benefit most from practice. This is not a thing that happens normally in your everyday life. Okay, what I want you to do is take these 2 texts, and I want you to find connections between the 2 texts, and I want you to tell me how they differ from each other and how they would think about each other. You may do this in college occasionally, but this is just training you. This kind of activity is only extremely useful on the SAT. It's something you should do naturally in everyday life, but you're only ever going to be tested on it here on the SAT. Once you're familiar with the style and the types of questions, this comparison exercise, then you're going to get better and better, and it's going to be less and less scary for you to do those double passages. So make sure to practice, practice, practice. In the book, there are more examples so that you can practice, 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 and just keep plugging away. Keep doing your best and familiarize yourself with the style. So in this video, we talked about a number of topics. What is inference? Well, inference is a conclusion based on evidence and logic. It's using only the information that you have to come to a reasonable conclusion. Can you logically say that this is the case given the information that you have? More than what you have already. Now, what do we need to do to infer correctly? Well, we don't add any information and we pay attention to detail. Every word is important. If I could maybe give one piece of advice for the whole thing, is that yes, you need to edit out, you need to notice what's important and what's unimportant, but really in the end, you can't skip a word. All the words are important. You can skip it after you process it. You can see it there, I know what that is, and you can leave it out. So pay attention to detail. It's very important. And what do we need to do to be most aware? What do we need to be most aware of with double passages? We need to be aware of similarities, differences, and points of view, and how those points of view relate to one another. So, finally, we're at the end of the reading comprehension section. This is all the strategy you'll probably need for a strategy for improving your reading comprehension. The things to look for, the main ideas and the tones, and knowing what kind of tricks they like to pull in the answer choices, you're ready to go. The number one thing you can do to improve your reading comprehension is read. Okay? There's no better way to improve your vocabulary and your reading comprehension than simply reading on your own. Hopefully you're the kind of person who really enjoys reading, you're the kind of person who has already spent a lifetime reading, and maybe you just need some help with the logic and things like that. But if you're the kind of person that struggles with reading or doesn't see natural enjoyment with it, that's fine. I don't like tennis. You know, it's a similar thing. But take this time to practice, right? If I had a tennis test coming up, I would, you know, practice tennis. If you have a reading comprehension test coming up, there's no easy way around it. Go practice reading. Go pick up a book. Go pick up any book and read and practice understanding it. So thank you for your time. Good luck on the test, and take care.